Ranked mode is coming to Pokemon TCG Pocket by the end of March. And with it coming out right around the corner, I want to share with you 10 tips for high level play in Pokemon TCG Pocket. Without ranked mode, you get a wide variety of different types of players that you play against online. And this late into the game, the beginner setting isn't really a factor anymore. Sure, some matches are pretty close, but for the most part, there are a lot of easy matches that end very quickly. Ranked mode is going to introduce a higher level of play, so these 10 tips are going to be high level that you might not normally use in your regular public matches. The first thing that I want to talk about is deck construction. Now, generally speaking, your deck is going to range based on what you're building around, but for the most part, I can confidently say that trainer cards are going to be more of a priority than your actual Pokemon cards. Good players understand this, good players coming from the actual Pokemon TCG understand this, but people that are playing this game for the first time might not really get that. And it is a weird concept to fully grasp, but I would say for the most part, more than half of your deck should consist of trainer cards. And in Pokemon TCG Pocket, a deck consists of 20 cards. So if you have more than 10 Pokemon cards, you might need to rethink your strategy there. I mean, right now in the current meta, one of the best decks out there is the 18 trainer card deck. And it's built around 2 copies of the same basic Pokemon, usually Articuno EX or Dialga EX. And literally every other card is a trainer card, and it sees a lot of success. I'm not saying you need to play a deck that drastic, but it just goes to show how important trainers are. And again, it all depends on what you're building around. So if your main card is going to be a 1-stage Pokemon, that is potentially 4 slots taken up from your deck just from that one Pokemon. And if it's a 2-stage, that's 6 total slots. Which leads into my next point. You're not going to want to run more than 2-stage Pokemon in one deck. That just gets a little too hectic. No matter how many Pokemon communication, Pokeballs, or Professor's Research that you use in your deck, it's never going to end up well. Now, if you're struggling to build your deck because you have too many evolution Pokemon in it, this is another thing that you might want to consider doing that can work out. And that's to run 1 basic Pokemon in the line or 1 end stage Pokemon in the line. So for a 1-stage Pokemon, this is how I personally run my Palkia EX deck. I only run 1 Eevee, but I have 2 Vaporeon. That's because I only need 1 Vaporeon. I don't need 2 Vaporeons on the bench. And with a 2-stage Pokemon like Magnezone in your Darkrai deck, you can get away with running 1 Magnemite or even 1 Magnezone, but you're always going to want to have 2 Magneton. And I think that goes for every 2-stage Pokemon. Your first stage you're going to want 2 of, because that's going to be the connector between your basic and your final stage. I wouldn't say do this with the main card in your deck, but more so for a supporting evolution card. And as for the supporters and the items that you're going to have in your deck, you're not going to want to have too many supporters. I'd say anywhere between 4 and absolute max being 7. This is just because you're only going to be able to use 1 supporter per deck, and you need to kind of focus your deck on the supporters that you play. Most often, you're going to want to run 2 copies of each supporter in your deck. Sure, you're going to want to run 1 copy here and there, but you want to have a focus within your deck. You don't want it to be spread out too thin. And the main reason why you don't want too many supporters in your deck is because you can only use 1 per turn. Now, item cards are nice too, and I think this is going to be the last addition to your deck. You're going to want to get your Pokemon in there, and then your supporters, and then your item cards. And I'd say you can't go wrong with how many items you run in your deck. Sure, you might not need a lot of Pokemon tools, but when it comes to Pokeballs, potions, Pokemon communications, that sort of thing, the more the merrier, really. Now, speaking of Pokeballs, we're going to move over to my next tip, which is the dreaded question that has been going around since Pokemon TCG Pocket has come out. What do you use first if you have both in your hand, a Pokeball or a Professor's Research? Well, it's quite simple. You're going to want to use your Professor's Research first if you're in search of multiple basic Pokemon. Professor's Research essentially thins your deck out. Say you have 10 cards left in your deck and you have 2 basic Pokemon that you need on your bench this turn. Using your Pokeball first and then Professor's Research will give you a 1 in 9 chance of getting that second basic Pokemon. When if you Professor's Research first, you have a 1 in 5 chance of pulling that basic Pokemon. Now, if there's any other card that you're in search of, you're going to want a Pokeball first and then Professor's Research. Whether it's another trainer card or an evolution Pokemon, that's going to be the case. So in short, the only time you're going to want a Professor's Research before you Pokeball is if you're in search of multiple basic Pokemon. But now we have a new search card in the mix, which is Pokemon Communication, and this is going to be my next tip: when to Pokemon Communication. Now, given its mechanic, it's a little bit more complex than Pokeballing and Professor's Research. Now, in most situations, when I'm searching for a specific Pokemon, I would always want a Pokeball or Professor's Research before I use the Pokemon Communication. Again, this just gives me a higher probability of finding that card and thinning that deck. Say I'm looking for a stage 1 or 2 Pokemon that isn't in my hand. Instead of Pokemon Communicationing right away, I would Pokeball first, just so I can get that Pokemon out of the probability of pulling it from the communication card. Again, Pokemon Communication is very situational. In most of the cases, I would focus on thinning out your deck before using a Pokemon Communication. So we just talked about 3 of the main draw cards in Pokemon TCG Pocket, but what if I told you there's a universal way to play these 3 cards in high level play? Well, that's exactly the case. This is my next tip, and this is what I would call the psychological draw. Now, say you have a really good hand and you already have something that you want to use right away, but you also have one of these draw cards. I would still play one of those draw cards, because if you're playing against a high level opponent, they're going to catch up on how good your hand is, and there is potential that they would have a red card or a Mars ready to make you shuffle your hand back into your deck. So with the psychological draw, you're going to want to make your opponent think that you're as desperate as possible. So say next turn I pull an Arceus, and that's the main card that I want to play, but I still have a Pokeball in hand. I will Pokeball first and then play the Arceus to make it seem like I used that Pokeball to get that Arceus. Same thing with evolution Pokemon. I would Pokemon Communication or Professor's Research before I evolve a Pokemon that's already in my hand. And this goes further for item or tool cards with Professor's Research. It's all to make your opponent think that you actually have a really bad hand when in fact you don't. So this doesn't only prevent your opponent from the probability of playing a red card or a Mars, but it also makes them underestimate you. Now, using up your resources can look like a bad thing, but in a lot of cases, it can be a good thing, which brings us to the next tip. Don't get supporter shy. Like I said before, you can only use a supporter once per turn, and there's going to be cases in the game where you can perfectly play a supporter card. But there's going to be other situations where you might not need to play it, but it can still benefit you. I would try to stay away from trying to make the perfect play and playing what works best for you in that moment. Say you have a Celebi that has 40 or 30 damage on it, and you have an Erica in hand and one still in your deck. I'd go ahead and use that Erica to heal it up all the way instead of a potion. Just in case your opponent does big damage next game, could potentially knock it out, or it would do irreversible damage where you would have needed 2 Ericas to use on it. And I think this goes without saying, if you have a Professor's Research in your hand and you have no use for any other supporters in your hand, you might as well use your Professor's Research. Now, while we're on the topic of supporter cards, let's move on to the next tip, which is the defensive Sabrina play. Ever since Cyrus has been introduced, it kind of took over the Sabrina role in a deck. But now in higher level matches, I'm seeing Sabrina being used defensively instead of offensively. Instead of making your opponent bring out a Pokemon from your bench for you to knock out or deal a lot of damage to, a high skill player will use a Sabrina to make their opponent switch out their active Pokemon just so they waste an energy or an X speed or a leaf to bring it back in next turn. Best case scenario, they have to waste an energy to accomplish that. I've started using Sabrina defensively like that, and there is a lot of success that I'm seeing from that play style. In high level games, you're going to want to be as annoying to your opponent as possible, and a defensive Sabrina play will very much give you that success. Now, on the topic of being as annoying as possible, this brings me into my next tip, which is make your opponent earn the prize card. Well, they're actually points. Prize cards are from the actual TCG, but it's the same thing. In Pokemon TCG Pocket, you win the game when you get 3 points. You get 2 points for knocking out an EX, and you get 1 point for knocking out just a regular Pokemon. Now, you're going to want to make your opponent earn that point. And of course, a defensive Sabrina can help accomplish that, or possibly switching out your active Pokemon to get a fully healed one in there. But the main thing is you just want to shield your active Pokemon, make your opponent take as many turns, use as many resources as possible. There are very toxic ways to accomplish this, like using Druddigon in your active spot, or even using a Rocky Helmet, or better yet, using those in combination. But if you're not running any of those cards, just make sure to give your opponent opponent the toughest time possible to get that point. Know when to call it quits on your active Pokemon. If you see it about to be knocked out, you might as well get the most out of it. Now, on the topic of making your active Pokemon last as much as possible and making your opponent earn that point, we're going to move on to the next tip, which is using a giant cape as a heal. Now, Giant Cape is a tool, and when you put it on your Pokemon, it gives it 20 more HP. And if you're all out of Iridas, Ericas, and potions, you can technically use a Giant Cape as a heal. If you view it that way, your playstyle will change a little bit and be a little bit more strategic. Just remember that this won't protect you from a potential Cyrus. Now, the last two tips are going to be kind of card specific. And the first one we're going to talk about are fossil cards. Now, fossil cards can actually be used as a really good early game shield. Now, if your opponent knocks out your fossil card, they get a point, but if they can't knock it out, you can discard it and your opponent will get no points and their damage will essentially be voided. This play will be more so used for an early game shield. You definitely can't get away with that late game. But another play you can use with fossils is just having it as a free retreat, essentially. If your active Pokemon gets knocked out, you can bring out a fossil into the active position if you don't know which one you want to bring out from your bench. Say you're waiting for a specific heal card or a tool or even an evolution Pokemon, you can put your fossil out there and see what you can draw. And then you can discard that fossil and make the play that you want. Towards the end of Genetic Apex and right before Mythical Island came out, we saw a lot of high-level players putting fossils in decks that didn't even utilize any of its evolutions. Nowadays, with all the support cards, I wouldn't really recommend that. But if you do find yourself using a fossil Pokemon in your deck, you can definitely pick up those tips. I mean, Rampardos is really popular in the meta. The next group of cards and the last tip that I want to talk about are Intel cards. Now, there's three different ones with the addition of Unknown, and we are seeing more Porygon play with Troll Porygon Z decks, and their ability allows you to look at the top card of your deck, and Unknown allows you to look at the top card of your opponent's deck. You get to choose, but we're just going to talk about looking at the top card of your own deck. Now, this could be paired up with cards like Pokemon Communication, Professor's Research, and Pokeball. Pokeball and Pokemon Communication requires you to shuffle your deck after you use those cards. So if you look at the top card of your deck and you don't like it and you don't want to get it next turn, you basically can give yourself a free shuffle and a new chance of getting something good. And of course, there's the basic play of looking at the top card of your deck. You like it, use a Professor's Research, and it's there. Now, if you're using Unknown's ability and you look at the top card of your opponent's deck and you don't want them to draw that, you can always Mars or red card them because it requires them to shuffle. I think the base play with Intel cards is just to look at the top card of your deck or your opponent's deck and just anticipate it and just figure out what you want to do next. Buy you some extra time, I guess. But there's better ways to play those cards if, of course, you find yourself using them. So those are the 10 tips or even just the 10 topics that I wanted to talk about in preparation for ranked play. It definitely niched down towards the end there, but I mean, I think those are all valuable tips to know. I hope you guys learned something new. If you didn't, you're probably already pretty well set up for ranked play. I'm definitely excited for it to come out. I hope you guys are too. And as always, if you enjoyed this content, make sure you like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.